This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Lit Lit Show on Thursday, the 1st of February. On a fabulous show tonight, we have a special guest, Professor Dr. Rachel Lofthouse. Tonight, we're going to talk about something all teachers know about, the staff room. Let's get to it.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
I love the Professor Doctor. That's a very unusual title.
Oh, we might as well give you your full title. Is that not your title?
Usually you choose one or the other, but it's very, yes, both apply.
Oh, that's maybe me. I'm quite old-fashioned. I thought that's just the way you did it, but there you go. There you go. Enjoy it.
Thank you.
Rachel, so you did some work on staff rooms. We're going to talk about staff rooms this evening.
We're going to, yes.
Yeah. Is it a controversial topic? I think it's a little bit prickly, a little bit thorny, maybe even staff rooms.
Do you know, I haven't thought about it as controversial.
Right.
I'm curious about them, and certainly finding out how other people feel about the staff rooms in their schools and colleges has demonstrated that we don't all experience them in the same way. So I guess you could argue that in some cases there's a degree of controversy or tension, but in others there's just that natural sense that we're all different. The places we inhabit are different, and the the person that we take into those places is different.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. I suppose when I was thinking about doing the program and having a chat with you, I kind of thought about my experiences of staff rooms over a very, very long number of years. And it goes away back to primary school. And I went to a very small 3-teacher primary school. And there was a kind of a staff room, but the door was always open and you could walk in and out, and you saw the teachers drinking tea and coffee and eating scones and things. And there was something very warm and homely and human about that. So that was one of my first experiences of a staff room.
Oh, I have just lost you now.
Yeah. Oh, got you back now.
Oh, good. Right. No, I lost you. I couldn't hear you for a minute there. Maybe you closed the door about staff room.
It's probably a good thing. A lot of people would say it's a good thing not to be able to hear me. I was just saying very quickly, my first experience of a staff room is the primary school teachers I had, where it was always kind of warm and colourful and cozy, and they were eating scones and drinking tea.
Isn't it interesting, actually, though, that we, as teachers, our first experience of the staff room was probably as pupils.
Yes.
And so it's not just something that we engage with in a professional sense, in our adult roles, but if we have a memory of it from when we were younger.
Yeah. Yeah. I have very clear memories of that primary school staff room. Now,
yeah, I'm trying to remember.
Oh, I think we've lost you again.
Struggling.
Heard a funny sound there. Oh, got you back now. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember my primary school staff room, and I'm struggling. I can remember the head teacher's office. That might tell you something.
It just might. I think I know the inside of my head teacher's office well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, are you still there, Rachel?
I am. Yes, I am.
Oh, good. I thought I'd lost you again. Yeah. I moved on to secondary school then, and I went to a boarding school, as listeners know, and you have to kind of say nowadays it was quite like Hogwarts, and that staff room was a very different affair. In fact, that staff room in my post primary school was down quite a lengthy dark corridor, and it was on the right. And you would not have dared to set foot in the corridor, let alone approach the staff room or knock the door. And the door would always have been closed. So that was a very contrasting, very different kind of experience.
Yes. Well, even those two anecdotes then do demonstrate that the staff room space is unique to each context, probably, and the experience that others have of it might stay with them for a while, because clearly you've remembered those two things quite clearly from your school days.
Yeah. My parents were both teachers, and maybe that has, some influence, that I suppose actually I'm just thinking now, yes, I might actually occasionally have been in the staff room of my mother's school from time to time, just remembering that now. Yeah. I suppose then moving on, my next experience of staff rooms was when I went on what we call teaching practice here, or teaching experience. You're a young teacher and you're placed in a school, and for the 6 or 8 weeks, whatever it is, you're kind of part of the school. And I suppose that was very different experiences for me, being in the staff room for the first time as a teacher, albeit a student teacher.
Yes, I remember that, being a student teacher, and the two different schools and the different staff rooms. Those are very vivid memories. And I also know that as a teacher educator, having visited dozens and dozens of student teachers on their placements, that the staff rooms that they were welcomed into were very different places. And on a couple of occasions, they were literally not welcomed into those staff rooms. There was a definite sense that, and there wasn't enough space for the student teachers, or it wasn't appropriate for the student teachers to be there. And sometimes it was the case that student teachers were almost given their own mini staff room to gather in, which was often portrayed as we're doing them a favour. We've given them this space, which is true, space is helpful, but could also be a bit dislocating, I think.
Yes, and I have experience of all of those types of staff room you mentioned. Yeah, the first one I was in as a student teacher was, it was so warm. And, there was so much empathy in the room, so much communication. These teachers who had, many, many, many years of experience spoke to me as an equal. They asked me, how did I get on? Oh, you teach that year 10 class. How did so-and-so behave today? And there was a real sense of kind of unifying camaraderie, empathy, understanding, which I do to this day recollect allowed me very much to grow into the kind of teacher that I became.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a very formative experience.
Very much a formative experience, yeah. The following year, I went to a different school for my teaching practice, and on the first day, you meet the principal and so on and so forth, and you're shown to the staff room. And on the first, I was shown into a seat, whereupon maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, a teacher came in and barked at me and said, "Get out of my seat." And that was a very different, it changed the course of the 6-week placement, I can tell you.
I'm sure it did. And it's a cliche, but it also really does happen, doesn't it?
Oh, it does happen. Oh, it does. And I mean, like you, I'm fortunate enough now, to go around and visit students on placement, and you really do get a sense of the relationships, the dynamic, the rapport, and how they're treated when you see them in that environment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's very true.
What are the uses of staff rooms then, Rachel?
Well, as we've already suggested, there's huge variation. But I do think that from the piece of research that I've been doing, you get a genuine sense that for some people, the staff room is that safe space. It's the place where they can escape from the immediate and urgent kind of challenge of their role, their forward-facing role in front of children and working with children and young people, and just gives them those few moments in the day of adult company, which, hopefully all teachers like children and young people, but we're people. So hopefully we also like to engage with our colleagues and our adults, or we just like that sense of retreat and that moment to get your head back into gear, breathe a little bit more deeply rather than in that kind of hurried sense where you're always on task and you're always on show. So I think for some people, the staff rooms are evidently a place of retreat and release and companionship. And in that respect, perfectly legitimate part of their workplace and an essential part for some people. Other people who responded to the research had a definite purpose, that they saw the connections they made with others in their staff room serving. So they recognised, for example, that in those places they knew who to seek out for certain types of advice, or they maybe didn't go with a purpose, but they would leave with a sense of they'd picked up an idea or they'd had an anxiety dampened down a little bit by some reassurance. So that sense of learning with and from each other and accepting some of the norms and routines of schools that you experience and sometimes experience as challenging and as dilemmas, and they are challenging and they are dilemmas, but then acknowledging that they're not unique to you, that other people in that community experience things that are similar and may have very similar emotional responses to them, or perhaps different emotional responses to them. But that sense of coming together and acknowledging them in a communal space at least eases some of that anxiety that it's just me that is experiencing this trouble, this issue, this dilemma. So I think for some people that is very, very important. That certainly seemed to come through. And for others, that some people are very strategic. People are different, aren't they? And some people use those staff room spaces quite strategically. A place to find the the people who they will find to be allies over time. Working out some of the micropolitics of a school, working out who the influences are, who the, those sorts of things. As employees, as professionals, we use some people particularly do use every opportunity to think and act strategically, and a staff room would be no different to anywhere else in a school.
Gosh, that's very interesting. Yes, yeah, and I recognize all three of those kind of meanings to it. The sanctuary, the making connection with others, the getting reassurance, and the strategies. Yeah, gosh, that's very interesting. We used to sit. One of the schools I taught in, our kind of usual seat, and we'll come to that maybe in a minute, but it would have been diagonally opposite the main entrance. And occasionally a colleague or two and I would sit and we would just watch teachers coming in to the staff room if we were ever lucky enough to have a free class or a free period. And it was amazing. You could identify on their faces, those kind of patterns that you referred to almost. So they would come in after, maybe a difficult break duty. And they would come in through the door and everybody would kind of sigh and you could see the shoulders drop and, they would move over towards the coffee machine or whatever. Very interesting.
And I think we have to acknowledge as well that just as everything else in in schools and education is it's not static. Staff rooms have changed a lot.
Yeah.
I've been working in education for 33, 34 years. And certainly there's a lot of physical change in the way that staff rooms are organised, used. And then there's the time component that many educators would say, that there's significantly less time now than there might have been 15, 20 years ago for those staff room encounters. And so we're not talking about something that's remained constant. We're talking about something that is constantly shifting, I think, when we think about staff rooms. And the pre and during and post-pandemic lockdowns also, I think, have made a difference too.
Yeah, I do. Yes, I agree. Yeah. We had a period of change to some of our rooms. The school kind of outgrew the buildings very quickly, and staff room had to be given up as a classroom. And the staff were kind of ranging around and floating everywhere, and they kind of found little corners and niches and whatnot to inhabit. Yeah. But I think we probably found that was quite divisive, because a lot of cliques and a lot of little groups kind of formed. That wasn't so it wasn't so healthy.
It's interesting as well to think, were those the cliques that already existed and they drifted into common spaces, or were they then reinforced or even created by that that need for separation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, and I think they certainly would have begun as little cliques that were already formed in the classroom, a much wider open environment, but they could gravitate to somewhere that was smaller, and very often, of course, a storeroom somewhere that was out of sight, and certainly out of sight of leadership and management. But then I think there was probably some kind of restructuring would take place. And there was almost, for some of them, was like a membership emerged. You had to be a certain type of person to be able to have your tea or coffee or lunch with that group. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, very interesting. Quite tribal.
Well, yes, definitely tribal and divisive, and not good or conducive to kind of, school politics and things like that. Yeah. So, is a staff room necessary, Rachel? Is it an absolute? Must we have one in a school?
Oh, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that. I think there are some significant advantages to having a physical space that is dedicated to the adults in the building. And yeah, so that in that respect, yes, I think they're necessary. But of course, you can create a physical space, but it doesn't mean it becomes used frequently. So we always have discretion and discernment in that sort of respect, unless, and again, some schools will still hold regular in-person, face-to-face briefings in the staff rooms, but a lot of schools, the staff don't fit in the staff room for a briefing of that sort anymore. The luxury of space has gone, if it was ever there, in many of our schools. So that kind of notion, certainly the schools I worked in, or the second school I worked in, we did have a weekly briefing from the head teacher, and it was always in the staff room, and it meant that some people were, standing, some people were sitting, some people were still drinking their cup of tea. It felt relatively informal, but also really quite important. It was a really key feature of each week. But I don't think that many schools have a staff room big enough for that. Or if they do, I think there's probably now a sense that those briefings are more formal. So you perhaps bring people into a more formal business-like space, because staff rooms don't necessarily have those business-like characteristics. And of course, probably in a lot of schools, the sense of a regular face-to-face gathering or briefing has been almost entirely superseded by, the digital platform, the messages that are sent out, that
Yes,
kind of thing.
yes.
And similarly, we would always have had pigeonholes, lots of mail, lots of copying to collect, all the stuff, all the kind of, that paperwork machinery of a school, that tends not to exist so much nowadays. So there's, that reason for going to a staff room to see what's in your pigeonhole has gone. So I think, technology, the lack of time, but also that sense, I think in a lot of the bigger schools, we've kind of adopted more of a business-like approach, and that sense that a staff room is probably too informal for the sorts of information passing that are often deemed appropriate and necessary. So I think, it's interesting. You asked, do we need them? Well, it depends, I guess, what else we have available to us. If we have other ways in which teachers gain information, get together formally as well as informally, get some refreshments, have that moment away from the kids. If we have other ways that can be achieved, then perhaps we don't need a staff room. But staff rooms may play a particular part for some teachers in some settings that is hard to replace.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I remember those days. You brought a lot of memories back to me with your images of, the briefings in the overpacked staff room, of course. And as you say, some people drinking tea and having a biscuit, and others standing, lying up against the walls.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I always thought, and I, again, another thing I was on both sides of, I would have been a teacher sitting down, listening to briefings, and then after a while, I would have been the person giving the briefings. It's interesting, yes. I quite enjoyed that and enjoyed both sides of it. There's something about, they're very atmospheric in a way. And we only ever had one briefing a week. It was always on a Monday. And, particularly if you got in early, you had your cup of tea, you had your chats, and then, when you were either receiving or giving the briefing, that was the marker. It wasn't so much the bell, but that was the marker that signified the week has begun.
Yeah. Yes. And there's a sense of community, I think, isn't there, in at that sort of time. And
I suppose that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. You talked about the images, the kind of memories that, are being evoked here, and the things that both of us can recall from our staff room days as teachers. And of course, we have other, I have a different role now, different type of building, different type of space. But it was the images, in the research that I did recently, it was conducted through the use of images, but not images of staff rooms. I wanted to connect people's memories of or experiences of staff rooms through images that were other than physical images of staff rooms. So I used things like bridges and libraries and sand pits and park benches and toolboxes. And I think I had about 50 different images. And one of the ways into the research was for people to look across all of these images and select one that resonated with them in relation to their experiences of staff rooms. And that was a really interesting way in to that piece of work, and generated a lot of responses and a lot of what seemed to be very thoughtful responses, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And listeners should maybe know, I attended a talk you gave recently in Dublin where you went through a lot of that. and just sitting in the audience listening to you, I thought, yes, they're very powerful. There was a lot of emotion attached to some of the images that people were choosing.
Yes, there really was. Yeah, there really was, actually.
Yeah.
And oddly, when I was selecting these images, although you, as a researcher, you want to be neutral, when you're looking and thinking what images might I find and provide for people to respond to, it's impossible with some of them to completely disassociate your own response. So I remember, for example, picking an image of two hands tightly gripped in tension, and it was just called the grip. And I, in my mind, felt that it was quite a troubling image. And I was really, therefore, quite surprised when some of the responses selecting that image were very positive responses. And I remember one of the phrases that somebody used was that they go to the staff room because it's where I get a grip back on my sense of worth as a teacher and my purpose as a teacher. So it holds me fast. When everything else seems to be battering me, this grip that I get a sense of in the staff room with my colleagues holds me fast. And I was quite taken aback by that, because not only is it a very strong emotion, very powerful emotion, but it was also not the one I expected to get from that image. So it was a very interesting way of exploring those perceptions and experiences. Something I hadn't tried doing anything quite like that before as a researcher, and I very much appreciated the fact that I decided to, because I found it was responded to well.
Yeah. It's kind of like research, that might come out of, or work really, or working that might come out of, another discipline, another hat I wear, and that's kind of therapy, and, how images are kind of, important, significant, symbolic drivers for us and carry and hold an awful lot of meaning, which is unique to us, of course, but very, very powerful work. See, we've kind of alluded a little bit to it, but what qualities or characteristics then should a staff room have? We've talked about size, talked a little bit maybe about tea or coffee, or what should a staff room look? Of course, there's no right answer, but what are the generic kind of qualities that a staff room might have?
Oh, that again, a good question. And there are, I guess there's some fine balancing, isn't there? So you want enough space so that people don't feel as if when they come in, there's nowhere to be. But you also don't want it to be so big that if it's actually only got 2 or 3 people in it, it feels empty and hollow and lonely and desolate. So I think using space, however much space you've got, if you're an interior designer, I guess you have expertise in thinking how can this space be used? How will people use this space? Certainly a lot of people picked the picture of the mug of tea. You won't be too surprised.
I was going to come to that.
Yeah. So, and again, you kind of assume that they're picking the picture of the mug of tea because they're going to say it's great to get some refreshments and sit down and have enough time to drink a cup of tea. And some people certainly did. And some people really said, the reason that they go is because there is available, people are actually serving you mugs of tea or coffee, as opposed to you've got to wait for the kettle to boil in the corner of your classroom. A few people said that sort of thing. Some people, the idea that you had, that the ability to get some refreshments itself was a source of tension, because they knew they should. They should try and hydrate. They knew they should try and eat something, but they actually physically didn't really have enough time to get across the whole school campus, up the stairs, and then to queue up. And then, so that sense of what should be there, somebody's made the effort to provide the facility for a mug of tea, doesn't mean that just because it's there, it works for everybody. So again, there's this whole thing about you might have a set of kind of golden rules, but you've then got to work out how the system will accommodate them. So definitely, people valued the opportunity to sit and chat and grab some refreshments, and whatever that looks like in your context. If it works for people, that's great. A bit of flexibility around the seating so that people can sit in quite big gatherings and have a bit of a laugh. A bit of a sense of, there's 7 or 8 of us here, and the pressure's not on anybody particularly. We're just here, we're just together. And then maybe a few quieter spaces with that opportunity for those, those maybe not confidential conversations, that's not appropriate in a staff room, but the quieter, reassuring conversations, but also to meet the needs of the different teachers. Because we can assume, all teachers are extroverts, but blatantly that's not true. We can assume that everybody's confident. Blatantly, that's not true. So, having a staff room space that allows for that complexity and that diversity of personality and choices that people make about how they want to use space and connect with others can make such a big difference. But the other thing I would say is that the staff room is just a room. It's the staff that make the difference. So it's the ability of the space to evolve as the staff evolve, so that it's not like fixed seating with that kind of clinical space, which is this, or even beautifully luxurious space that has been put in place and imposed on staff without a sense that staff can go in and actually make it feel like theirs. So too corporate, it's unlikely to feel like it really belongs to the staff. That belongs to the organisation. But something that can evolve as the staff evolve, something that doesn't kind of, feel like it's, lost its way because somebody brought in a plant pot with a plant in. Then enough people to go in and check that plant is still alive. Those are the sorts of things.
Very good. That's very good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
I know that in a lot of schools now, staff rooms have been converted into teacher workstations, and so that opportunity to, maybe come away from your classroom and work somewhere different is often accommodated. But if it's only workstations and no social space, that feels like a compromise, or the compromises all sorts of things. Having a bay with some books and some posters with some fresh ideas of resources and websites, that sort of thing that people can, glance in at and see what catches their eye. That sort of thing, I think, makes a difference as well. But I mean, they are complex spaces if they're going to work, if they're going to function well for a number of purposes, for a number of different people over a period of time. But I think probably that sense that it belongs to the staff and that it's theirs to shape probably allows it to be more appropriate and more useful than if it isn't. But also remembering that, teachers are adults, they have choices about the places where they want to work. And in a lot, not all, but in many other workplaces, contemporary workplaces, that social space is seen as a really critical part of the environment. So, and it's pleasant, and it's deliberately pleasant. So you kind of question, why shouldn't teachers, teaching assistants, school leaders have a bit of that?
Oh, I agree with that. I agree. Yes. A staff room should be a place where they feel, valued and important and prized and so on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, that's excellent. You raised an awful lot of issues there for me. Maybe a couple of just, before we have the news segment, Rachel, a couple of quick things. What about TVs or music or computer games or things like that? Do you have any thoughts on whether the staff room is an appropriate place for, say, a television with rolling news or something?
Do you know, I have no thoughts on that. And I also know nobody in my research referred to that, to anything around media in the staff rooms or gaming. It just didn't come up. And that might be because of the images, because clearly what I was asking was for people to reflect on the images in whatever way they wanted to.
Of course.
Maybe that just didn't get triggered, but I don't know. And what I haven't done is a kind of survey of what have you got in your staff room, and it didn't come up in either the image responses or the focus groups. So no, that's quite curious, quite interesting.
I haven't seen it much now, to be honest, but I suppose lately, again, going out visiting students and being in a lot of schools over a short period of time, I've maybe seen it occasionally, but not much. My thoughts, my own thoughts would be, it's not a place for a television, and certainly not rolling news
but then we all carry our own devices, don't we now? So there's that sense that very rarely do we all sit and watch the same program anyway.
That's true.
But I guess no, it's interesting, and there is a lot more we could fathom out about this space, but it didn't crop up.
Yeah. It's interesting. You used the term, the functions of a staff room, and we covered a lot of the functions that I think exist. But I do think some functions are more prevalent than others, and I think, as you said, those discussions that you can have, that kind of sense of the staff room almost like a mirror. So, maybe as a young teacher, I'm sitting there and I hear an experienced teacher come in and talk about how he dealt with a class that I have, and maybe I'm finding them difficult. And you can kind of, see how you match up with this teacher who has 20 or 30 years experience. I always find that a very valuable kind of learning point in staff rooms.
Absolutely. And I think we do shine a much fiercer light on professional learning and training nowadays for teachers. And as a consequence of that, more of it is managed and formalized, I think, through, professional qualifications. In England, for example, we have this huge suite now of MPQs. But what we may overlook at times is that informal learning space, the kind of emergent and organic learning space that is sometimes about serendipity rather than about forward planning. And the intergenerational learning between more and less experienced teachers, part of that, the interdisciplinary learning, those people who have specialisms in different subjects, if you're in a secondary school or even in a primary school where people are taking the lead on different subjects, but also that sense of different roles. So, the Senkos and their team, the insights that they might bring to a conversation that bubbles up in a staff room that hasn't had to be planned for, is not part of an agenda, isn't going to be minuted and reported on, but the insights that they bring. And also how, for example, that team might better understand the needs of their staff that they're working to support to meet the needs of children because of the conversations that they have with them outside of that agendered space.
That's a fantastic point. And that's a question I had for you. Does the staff room, whatever its, its climate, it's whatever the communication or whatever, does the staff room contribute to the quality of teaching and learning?
I would hope it does. And I would certainly say from the information I've captured, and its self-report, there are examples of where teachers feel more empowered or enabled or informed, and therefore influences teaching and learning, or where they feel more reassured, so their anxiety is suppressed, and that might help them, manage certain circumstances and classes and etc. So that would have a knock-on effect. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it, where I know I try and identify these kind of golden threads or the cause and effect, and we love the idea of a randomized controlled trial that can prove that if you did X rather than Y, you will get ABC, rather than 1, 2, 3. We love that idea of being able to diagnose and identify real direct causal effects, but I don't think the reality is that that's true very often. I think when we try and slice education up like that, we're doing it a disservice, actually. But the problem is that when we do it a disservice, it's because education is so complex. There are so many components that will help to generate the environment in which teachers can teach their best lessons, learners can fulfill their potential. It's and that we can create a stable and sustainable and happy and thriving, flourishing community. There are so many components of that you couldn't say, well, it's because of the staff room. But I think you can certainly argue that staff rooms can make a significant contribution as one of those components, but for good or ill. It's like everything. It can go either way. In a staff room where the only people who come together are those people who are, jaded and miserable and find it very hard to say things positive about individual children, is not a place where others are going to come and feel enabled and empowered and informed. And I don't think many staff rooms are like that, but there may be occasions when that's what it becomes.
Yes, you do. You can get your cynic's corner, and whether it's a permanent feature or whether it's temporary, because as you said earlier, and I definitely agree, I mean, staff rooms do change over time. They evolve. They become something else. Yes, that's very, very interesting what you said, about looking for what directly influences teaching and so on. And I'm doing you a disservice there in what you said. And over 39 years, I've kind of, it's not really resented or resisted that. I've maybe not paid that the dues that it is due. And I loved your earlier phrase when you talked about staff rooms being emergent and organic places of learning sometimes, and sometimes, as you said, that's serendipitous. And what I always found was that's kind of much more like person-centered learning. I could go into the staff room on a wet Wednesday morning, having just, done a horrible lesson with a group, and I can find someone or something that lifts me. And next Wednesday, I'm, in a better position to deal with that group or to help them along. I've always found that very, very worthwhile in staff rooms.
One of the interesting things in my work is that I work with a lot of coaches and mentors in education. And without doubt, coaching in particular has seen a significant surge in English education anyway, in English schools.
But it has everywhere here, yeah.
It's becoming global. And a couple of years ago, I was working with a group of coaches, quite experienced coaches on the whole. And it was a kind of a deliberate network we brought together online to help, because often coaches who are working in blended roles or as freelance coaches in education are oddly quite isolated. That there isn't the same. They're not part of a team. They're often an individual. That's why they're a coach. So we were bringing people together, and we were reflecting on the kind of trajectory of schools and coaching over time. And the majority of people in the space in the online meeting had probably got 20, 30 years experience in education each. And we were talking about staff rooms, and a comment was made that before we had coaching, we had staff rooms. And that seemed like a really interesting insight.
Yes.
A very interesting sort of acknowledgement of the fact that coaching was growing in frequency and hopefully for good effect, but that coaching is intentional, it's managed, it's hopefully non-hierarchical. It hopefully is a space in which the teacher, the coachee themselves, if you like, they set the agenda and lead the way, hopefully. But it is still intentional and managed. It requires a resource, and it's growing massively. And what we then kind of had this conversation about was, well, what was it about some staff rooms that might have served the same purpose as some coaching?
What a super question.
Have we lost some of that? And is that one of the reasons that coaching is booming? And, we didn't resolve it. It was just a short conversation. But that was one of the things that made me curious to do this piece of work, to look at the types of interactions that happen in staff rooms and see what kind of impact they have.
Yeah. Fascinating thought and very interesting to wonder, is there a direct correlation between the two?
That down to the cause and effect there.
Yes, exactly. That's why I'm saying that. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we're going to listen to some news messages now. And after this short break, we will be wondering who cleans the dirty dishes in the sink in your staff room and what's growing in the fridge.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This week in the news, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation published their report, Poverty 2024. Among many of its startling conclusions was that 1 in 5 people, that's 22% of the UK population, were in poverty. In 2021 to 22, that's 14.4 million people. 8.1 million were working age adults. 2.1 million were pensioners. And 4.2 million were children aged between 3 and 10. And overall, this represented the longest period of increased poverty in over 20 years. These figures also show that 6 million people were in what the Rowntree Foundation describes as very deep poverty. This week, widely reported, was the government's plan to ban disposable vapes. The Guardian carried a story earlier in the week of a head teacher who revealed that a vape detector he had installed in school bathrooms went off more than 100 times on the first day. He also recalled his horror when a student passed out after sharing a vape with someone else before school. Speaking to head teachers up and down the country, I don't think there's one school where young children are not addicted to vapes, he is quoted as saying. The Times educational supplement on the 24th of January carried a story that would hardly surprise many teachers. With the headline that just 4 in 10 teachers found their last inset day useful, 41% of classroom teachers questioned in a survey described their last inset day as either somewhat useful or very useful, while a third said it was not particularly useful, according to figures published by Teachers Tab. The findings were based on 9,000 teachers across England, surveyed during the autumn of 2023, and are part of a report highlighting shortcomings in current teacher professional development. However, almost a fifth of teachers, 17%, said they would prefer to receive £2,500 worth of CPD vouchers over, or rather instead of, a £1,000 pay rise. The conclusion being that teachers value professional development if they have more control over its delivery. According to The Guardian this week, London councils are preparing to mothball schools to avoid a boom or bust cycle of closures. This is primarily caused by a falling birth rate, higher housing costs, and the aftermath of Brexit, which saw an exodus of young families from the London area. This week in the House of Commons, Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, was accused of filibustering by the Speaker Lindsay Hoyle, who admonished her for her lengthy, time-wasting answers to questions over exams and crumbling schools. The Speaker said, "We're having this problem every time, and it's topical questions. They're meant to be short and punchy." And finally, this week saw the conclusion of the BET Education Technology Conference in London at the Excel Centre. Among the many exhibitors you will have found, if you'd gone there, the Teachers Talk Radio exhibit, with Tom Rogers and other Teachers Talk Radio presenters conducting interviews, recording videos, which you can find on YouTube, and generally creating awareness of the work of Teachers Talk Radio. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Welcome back to the Late Late Show on Thursday, the 1st of February. I'm with Rachel Lofthouse, and we're talking about staff rooms and the research Rachel has done in terms of teachers, staff rooms, and imagery. It's fascinating stuff. And I suppose I'm coming away with just two big things. I'm limiting myself to two big things. And the first thing I'm really thinking or feeling is staff need each other. That's coming across strongly to me. And secondly, that the staff room, the location, and although it's the people that are important, the staff room is a space for growth, development, and learning. Rachel, are you still there? Have we lost you?
Yes, I am.
Oh,
no,
you
I'm
are.
still
Great.
there.
Great.
No, I was just listening to your. I was listening to your reflections.
Okay, yeah. We're battling with broadband issues and things here, so We'll hope for the best. So we will. Rachel, do you think the staff room, I know there are briefings and there are things like that, but broadly speaking, is a staff room a place where senior management and principals should go, for example, to have their lunch or their break or their tea?
Oh, that is a really good question, isn't it? I think in lots of ways, I think if they can't, won't, or don't, that says something very significant about the staffing structure and the hierarchical constructs of a school. My personal feeling, and this is not so much driven from the research, but my personal feeling is that those sorts of overly constructed hierarchies are essentially quite unhelpful in schools. And if a staff room is a space where those hierarchies are broken down, where people are seen much more as equals, having equal value, equal worth, equal access to opportunity, equal contributions to make, I think that's a really powerful reason for senior leaders, middle leaders, and everyday staff to mix together. On the other hand, I do appreciate, and this does come from the research, that for some people, having that space away from the gaze of senior leaders was really quite critical. But again, it tells you something about the senior leaders and the hierarchy and the implications of that, not the staff room itself.
True. Yeah, very true. Yeah. I suppose I always felt, discretion was the better part of valor there. And you could go in, you could have a cup of tea, but you might stand over near the tea or coffee, but you would go out, and leaving staff to their moment, to their sanctuary.
I think that a discerning leader will make the right decisions, won't they?
Yeah, well, you hope so, but yes, yeah. I always think, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this as well, Rachel. I wonder, in your view, are staff rooms confidential places? You see, I have a kind of a developed sense over years that the staff room, and I don't mean this in any derogatory way or anything, but the staff room does a lot of work for the management. So, allowing staff to get together, to have in-depth discussions about school issues, indeed pupils, parents are very often discussed in staff rooms, and really allowing staff to, bounce off each other, offload issues, and as we talked about earlier, feel refreshed, renewed, and able to go out again. I think there's a lot of very good work there that, if it's not done in that staff room, is very much the bread and butter of management. So I'm wondering, are they confidential places in that sense that people can offload?
I think there needs to be a space where people can be honest about how they feel and about the challenges that they face. And undoubtedly, sometimes that honesty comes from a place of discomfort. So I think there is that. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because there are lines in the sand over which it is utterly inappropriate in a professional context to wander. And of course, there are also issues around safeguarding and well-being and mental health and disclosure that we need to be conscious of, whatever our space that we occupy is. But I think it goes back to that notion of, before we had coaching, we had staff rooms, that quite a lot of the thoughtful, problem-solving, reassuring kind of conversations used to happen in staff rooms. And where they don't, we need to find another outlet for them. And coaching and supervision have become much big businesses in some cases. They genuinely are businesses. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think there's something there, but I'm not sure that we can put the genie back in the bottle.
Oh, very good. Yeah. 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 I suppose that leads me on to think a little bit. And it's not going to be all the time, but again, as you've said, staff rooms shift, change, evolve, but what kind of things happen then when, the ethos in the staff room becomes different from the ethos of the school?
Oh, ask that question again. I'll have to think about
I'm
it.
just wondering, sometimes staff rooms can evolve, and there can be a period of time for any number of reasons where, maybe there is a little corner and there is some cynicism, some negativity, there's some hurt teachers. There are teachers who are, feeling underappreciated and undervalued within their schools. And I'm just, I think what can happen there is that the ethos in the staff room, the climate, the felt sense and so on in the staff room can be different from what the leadership, the management, and the governors want in the entirety of the school, through its classrooms, its corridors, its community. I just wonder if you've any experience of that or thoughts on that.
I think that is absolutely the case, that staff rooms, they become quite febrile places, and they can become quite intense places. And there's always a gap between the kind of mission statement and the lived experience of any organisation, between the kind of ambition and objectives and the actual reality. And clearly, one of the things that good leaders are trying to do with their community is to narrow that gap, and indeed to help the mission and vision of the school evolve because of the energy and the goodwill and the commitment and the sense of purpose of all of the community, including the staff. And that, so in some respects, the staff room can become it can be the hot plate of development. Hot plate is not the right word, but that can be the source of that energy. But as you say, it can also be the point at which the dissonance becomes very real. And that's inevitable, I think, in some places. And I guess what you might then get is that sense of agitation, depending on how unionized a staff are, you might get that sense of activism. But sometimes you need that in order to kind of joggle people out of their comfort zone and to raise to the surface the issues that are impacting on people's well-being and lives, and their future ambitions in our profession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Yeah, I suppose that kind of thought emerged from whether management should or should not be, and in what manner they should be in the staff room, and whether they pick those things up.
And I guess the first rule, the only real rule for me, would be that they should never be there in a surveillance mode. That's not appropriate.
Absolutely. You're reminding me, this is a show of memories this evening. You're reminding me of one vice principal a very, very long time ago. And that was his de facto being in the staff room. It literally was to survey with such scrutiny. You really felt you didn't need Ofsted. You felt you were inspected every break and lunch. But,
that's not very helpful,
days,
is it?
Hopefully those days are well gone.
Well, you'd hope so, but I'm not sure.
I know.
It doesn't. Yeah. So again, and some of the data from the research would suggest that still does happen.
Oh, I know it does. Yeah. We're laughing a little, might be tongue in cheek, but we are laughing, Rachel. What's the role of humour in the staff room?
Humour is part of humanity. So I guess if staff rooms are where the humanity gather, then humour should be present. Is it? I mean, like it is in any context, it can be a really important way for people to take the pressure off, to expose and reveal some of the things that are actually creating tension, but in an alternative way. But again, it can be humour can be very divisive as well, and there is that risk, isn't there, that people encounter what others would say, well, it's just banter, it's just humour, but actually it's not. It's felt very differently than that.
Yes, of course.
On the outside. So again, staff rooms are like they're like a family Christmas dinner, aren't they? And there will be a moment when you feel this is coming along swimmingly, and there'll be other moments when it all feels like it's falling apart, and you wish you'd never had to have another one.
Oh gosh, yeah. Very good. Yeah.
Not in my family, clearly.
Oh, not in mine either, of course not. No. Yeah. I suppose I think, I do think humour is very important, but you're right, and you're absolutely right to point out the dangers in it. I think I've been very lucky to have had many colleagues who are, really very talented people and people I've admired over years. I met some really superb raconteurs who could tell you stories, and maybe stories about their teaching even, that give you immense enjoyment and fun, but also, were very educational. They really taught you things.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I know, when people were remembering Tim Brighouse, it was those sorts of qualities that they valued so much in knowing him. And absolutely, I have very strong memories of those storytellers. And I mean, actually, that's interesting because inadvertently you've connected with another piece of work that I'm involved with, which has been around narrative and about the importance of using narrative as a means of kind of communicating across those generational gaps in education, and using narrative to identify challenges and opportunities, and even a narrative form of coaching. But it comes down to that, that wealth of story that we actually can carry from the wealth of experience that we gain in education.
That's very interesting, Rachel. That's maybe another entire show. But
there'd be better people than me to talk about narratives, but yes, it'd be a lovely show.
I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so. But it's interesting. We use narrative a lot in Northern Ireland to kind of, that intergenerational kind of trauma that has gone with the Troubles and things.
Mm-hmm.
I know there would be groups now who would be very reliant on that kind of narrative and storytelling, and getting those kind of broad, deep, meaningful messages across to try to unite communities. It's very, very interesting. Yeah. Rachel, we're really out of time. And as is traditional on this show, I ask a question that goes along the lines of, Rachel, if you had a magic wand and only one spell that you could cast, what would you wish for that would improve the lot of teachers?
Well, you did warn me about an hour and a half ago of this question. And so I thought about it, and I thought what my magic wand would achieve is that we have an education system that treats adults as adults, so teachers as adults, and allows children to be children.
Excellent.
And that's it.
A nice short and sharp. Wish. That's how a spell should be, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you said one wish.
Yeah,
Has
one
to be
wish.
memorable. Yeah, but I think, it is a bit too easy to forget that the staff are adults, they're grown-ups, and they should be treated with a huge amount of respect for their professionalism and autonomy. Because if you don't, you lose it, But also children are children. They're not mini adults. And so we need to remember that in our schools.
I think there's another 2 shows in your final remarks there, Rachel. But listen, we've come to the end tonight. I have thoroughly enjoyed our chat. So much to think about. I'd also like to give up just a special thanks to a mutual friend I think we have, and a friend of the show, Jill Berry.
Oh, yes.
I think we both spoke to Jill about the show that was coming up. So special thanks to Jill. And that's really it, Rachel, except again to thank you very much for coming on the show. You've been a fabulous guest, and I really look forward to having you on again in the future.
Oh, well, thank you. And it was lovely to meet you in Dublin. So it's nice to chat again.
Oh, we forgot about Dublin. But Rachel, Dublin's the secret. What happened in Dublin stays in Dublin. Great to talk to you. Thank you, and good night.
Good night.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.